And essentially what we wanted to do was build a full digital media brand around it, sell it ourselves, own the monetization ourselves. And it worked incredibly well. Ultimately, the key is great talent who people want to listen to and who have great rapport with each other. I did once stand up in Radio Row with this accent and shout, "Who loves orange soda?" And it was Kel from Keenan and Kel.
Welcome to the How to Be a Journalist podcast. In celebration of News Associates' 20th year anniversary, throughout 2026, we're going to be interviewing people who have been there and very much done it. So, whether it's accomplished grads in our industry and even those who have taken the skills they've learned on the course and taken other industries by storm. Today's guest is Matthew Sherry, co-founder of Platform Media, founder of the UK's only NFL magazine, Gridiron, and a former News Associates trainee who has gone on to build one of the most exciting media businesses in the UK. He's covered Super Bowls, interviewed NFL legends, to building a company that works with brands like Disney, Prime Video, M&S, and much, much more. Matthew's journey is a proper example of what's possible when you combine traditional journalism skills with ambition, creativity, and a little bit of entrepreneurial mindset as well. So, Matthew, welcome to the How to Be a Journalist podcast. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. It's surreal. I'm just seeing Angela for the first time in 18 years, and I've just told her she hasn't aged a day, which she hasn't. You've told me that she destroyed everybody at paddle, which is great to hear. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks for having me.
No, fantastic. And yeah, she didn't just destroy everybody. She cooked every single person one by one. And she was in a duo with James Parsons. And they, honestly, they were the one duo that I just did not want to come up against. And we didn't get close.
Did James Parsons contribute to the duo, or was it Ellen?
I would say I plead the fifth. But okay, let's talk about Platform Media and more generally, what are you doing at the moment? Tell me about the last week of your life and what you've been up to.
Well, it's been a week in London, which is increasingly a rarity for me now. I'm from Hartlepool in the northeast of England. I'm back there now. I did my journalism training in London and then moved back up north for a job. But yeah, I mean, last week in my life, what have I done? I'm primarily, we Platform Media is a business that we built up and sold initially in May 24, and we kind of sold the rest of it into a Swedish group called PodX. PodX own 13 podcast studios around the world. So Platform, I think it's fair to say, is the most advanced of all the PodX businesses. So yeah, about 6 months ago, I kind of pivoted my role to be the Chief Revenue Officer of PodX. So my role now is a global role, primarily working with, we acquired a great company in the US called Lemonada Media, which is a very big and famous podcast business from the US last year. And essentially my role is primarily working with that business. So yeah, we were founded in COVID. So at this point I'm pretty well worn with working from home. So a lot of my role now is working from home, late nights, US time zones. I'm working more closely with the team in the US. But once a month I come into London. Our Swedish CEO is now based in London as well. We do business reviews with all of our markets once a month. So this week has been my London week. What does a London week look like for me? Literally walking as much as I can around the city in meetings. That's it. That's my job now. Meetings and phone calls and spreadsheets.
So when you have a title as impressive sounding as Chief Revenue Officer, I do have to ask, what does the Chief Revenue Officer do?
Drives revenue into a business. Also, monitors the revenue performance of a business. But it's different. If you were a CRO inside of a business itself, it's a much more kind of hands-on in the weeds of revenue role. My role is a lot more strategic than that. So a lot of it is kind of tactically advising the businesses on how they are going to evolve themselves for a ever-shifting and quickly evolving landscape. We were very good with. I used to watch Dragon's Den a lot when I was a kid, and I used to always think, oh well, you watch these great inventions, and it was like never have a business idea. Well, with Platform, we kind of just had the perfect idea in the perfect moment, and the perfect method of how we were going to attack the podcast industry. And frankly, the industry is has caught up to that only in the last 6 to 12 months. So, you know, a lot of my role is strategic in the sense that for where the industry is now, we built the business 5 years ago. So essentially my remit is to then translate that knowledge, experience, and listen, the best experiences you get from failure, by the way. So like kind of stop people doing the things that we did wrong. Like they've kind of got someone who can look into the future slightly because we've already built that business. So I have to translate that across our group. Our kind of core priorities in the group, candidly, are the 2 English language businesses. So yeah, it's primarily the US, but yeah, that's my remit. It's a bit of everything.
Yeah. So take me back to lockdown when you founded Platform.
Yeah.
What was your thought process, and why did you decide to start up the studio?
The reason is, so I got into magazines. So I had kind of 3 to 4 years as a traditional sports journalist at an agency similar to News Associates. I was at the Press Association, and I'd founded an NFL magazine in 2013. Candidly, like, you know, in 2020, that magazine was going well. I'd kind of evolved from the editor of a magazine who founded it to somebody who was managing the P&L of it on an individual level. It had become a little mini business. But unfortunately, when it's a magazine and a pandemic hits, that business would have been out of business quite quickly. So there was a situation where essentially my dad was about to retire. I had a wife and 1 kid at the time, and he came round my house and told me he was going to delay his retirement to pay our mortgage if we needed to, because like that was just the world that we lived in at the time. I kind of told myself that day that was never going to happen. So we had to pivot quite quickly. It was quite lucky that the publishing company that the magazine was in at the time was about to get wrapped into a kind of broader small investment group in media. And essentially that whole group was centered on this fantastic business that was a print management business that printed all of our magazines, and that was most screwed by COVID. So we were kind of all there with a need to kind of evolve and adapt really quickly. I got the opportunity to chat to Mike Tyndall, James Haskell and Alex Payne, who obviously rugby legends and broadcaster, but had done a podcast at Joe Media called House of Rugby. For whatever reason, that kind of, you know, Joe Media were in administration at the time, and the guys wanted essentially they'd enjoyed doing the podcast, but they wanted to build something bigger in rugby. So essentially the model I pitched them, we pitched up against production companies. We weren't a production company at the time, but essentially what I said to them is, look, if you look at a podcast through the prism of how you would have looked at a magazine 25 years ago, you have this thing in the center, and then you can evolve a whole brand around that. So essentially for us, podcasting became about building mini focused media brands in specific sectors. And we started in rugby. Now, the way our model differed from everybody else is twofold. The podcast industry at the time was basically almost entirely the birth child of the BBC and people who'd been in radio, and that was the natural extension. So what you generally found at the time is that it was very audio first as an industry. We basically wanted to make a video first play in podcasting, which now seems completely normal, but at the time, you know, there wasn't a load of people doing it. It was a much higher cost base and everything else. But then separate to that, if you start a podcast, even today, if you guys decide we're starting a podcast, we want to monetize that podcast, what you would generally do is you go to a company, Acast or Global, and then they monetize your podcast for you. And essentially what we wanted to do was build a full digital media brand around it, sell it ourselves, own the monetization ourselves. And it worked incredibly well. I mean, like Good Bad Rugby, like it's pretty kind of plug and play this. You know, if you have a podcast that does X listeners, you'll generally generate about this in revenue. So Good Bad Rugby would be on its audience level, kind of between 500,000 and £1 million a year. It's always done 2.5 to 3 times more than that. So that was our starting point. We also got lucky. Every business gets lucky, I think, that succeeds in one way or another. Which is that at the time, the podcast industry was, I mean, it's going through a bit of a boom again now, actually, through the video side of things. But basically, Spotify, Amazon, and companies of that ilk had basically decided that podcasts were going to become their marketing strategy to drive users on the platform. So they were commissioning a lot of production companies to make content. We went in with kind of this, I mean, it's almost comical now to think, but we went in with this kind of, this is the podcast industry, these are all its problems, this is our solution to it. And you know what? People listened, and we got some good foot in the door at the start. COVID meant that we could distill 6 months worth of meetings into 2 weeks. And I always remember we set the production business up alongside Good Bad Rugby, and our ambition we had at the time was Spotify, Amazon, and Audible, who were a subsidiary of Amazon, who were commissioning content. We had an ambition to get one show commissioned by one of them in our first 12 months, and we actually had 3 commissioned, 1 from each, before we launched the company. So like, it all just kind of snowballed from there, and the company's evolved a million times since then. But yeah, it was our necessity for me on a personal level, and it gave me kind of a, you know, I love doing the NFL magazine, but it was like a lifestyle business. You know what I mean? I was going to the US, I was going to the Super Bowl every year. I loved doing it. I wasn't earning a lot of money, but I loved it. But it gave me a kind of kick up the behind to be like, well, you know, what that kind of necessity drove me on to achieve something that is a lot bigger than that, and I'm incredibly proud of. So
Yeah, that's a really cool story from, like, because a big lesson that people, well, the journalism tutors will tell trainees even today would be start your own TikTok page, start your own magazine, start your own blog, start your own Substack. And for you, it seems like starting Gridiron was almost like you grew a business acumen just from, out of necessity, as you said, but you also used those skills and you just kind of just redirected them into platform, and from that point onwards, started it off. So when like you had those 3 first shows commissioned by Spotify, Amazon, the big podcasting platforms, like, how did it feel? Like, tell me about like the feeling of like,
honestly, probably like, I mean, there's been a lot of surreal moments in the last 5 years. I'm very much an accidental entrepreneur, but like surreal. I mean, like, you know, and I always was kind of grounded by the fact that I know how important that conversation with my dad in the front room of our house was. So like, it almost went from one extreme to the other. Do you know what I mean? Because even at that point, like, I mean, you know, Gridiron was generating about £160,000 a year in totality in its best year across magazine subscriptions and some commercial partnerships. Like, you know, in the blink of an eye, we had, I think the rugby show did 800,000 its first year, and then the three combined commissions were worth £1.6 million. I mean, we built a 7-figure turnover business without even launching it. So it was incredibly surreal. And obviously you're also flying by the seat of your pants. So like, you know, I mean, I just look back at some of the things we said to people, some of the boldness we went into rooms with, and it's just, it's comical, but it was just surreal. And to be honest, it was, you know, I've never really, up until probably the last 12 months since I've started this role, which is a lot more strategic, but also a lot less intense, I've never really come up for air, so I never really thought about it. There was a lot of long hours in that as well. I mean, we were sitting on Zoom calls till 3 o'clock in the morning for the first 12 months every night. I mean, it was crazy, but yeah, it was surreal, and obviously compounded by the fact that it was surreal for everybody because we were in the middle of a pandemic. You know, the amount of calls, I always remember we met Global, who basically a big radio house in the UK. They own virtually every billboard in the country and a load of massive radio brands. They've got a big office in Leicester Square. I always remember doing a meeting with a guy who was on the C-suite there. He was actually the chief technology officer. He was now a press associate where I used to work. And I always remember him saying to me after, we got on this presentation, you had a kid crawling over the top of your shoulder, and you know, you were kind of playing with toys, and you were also, and we thought, who the hell is this guy we've been put onto? And then he said, you started speaking, and we were like, oh my God, this is the most interesting media business in the space. So there was just like, I would say there's so many stories I could tell, but it was surreal.
Yeah. I guess when you're like creating a podcast show like the Good, the Bad, the Rugby, what do you think are and let's say there's somebody at home that is grasping with the idea of starting their own podcast. What are like the three most important things that can grow your podcast from conception to being a full-fledged product to a leader in their niche? What do you think?
Well, I mean, you have to have great editorial, and I think the key to great editorial is chemistry. A great podcast should feel like you're listening to some people having a conversation that you'd like to be a fly on the wall of. You know, so chemistry is important. Listen, increasingly profile is important. Like, it's a lot more crowded now than it even was 5 years ago. So how do you stand out? I mean, but then there's also fundamentally tactics. So like, our entire business was built on the idea that there were two issues in podcasting, which I think still exist today, which is the marketing and the monetization. And our model was essentially, Good Bad Rugby had 80,000 listeners a week in its first episode, but by the time we added YouTube, it was doing another 50,000. But then by the time we've cut down the amazing moments on social, and that's your marketing strategy, right? Like, you can do billboards and everything else. And like, now when we launch a podcast, we have a great relationship with Spotify, we get billboards and it's amazing and the guys love it who are on it. But what actually drives it is, how do you tell people about a podcast you love? Well, the simple thing we always said was, well, you send it to your mates on WhatsApp. So everything for us was a really good social strategy in every show that we have. So like, at the time, there were the guardrails of people just wanted all the best stuff in the audio of the podcast. We just looked at it totally differently. Somebody who watches a minute and a half of Good Bad Football, which is killing it on the vertical screen with Paul Scholes and Nicky Butt, like, someone who's watching that to us is as important as somebody who listens for the whole hour, because everything's about discoverability, marketing, getting into conversation, getting people talking about it. And actually then, without going too into the weeds of it, our monetization model is we sell the social content package with the long form content and everything, and that creates kind of a situation where through one tactic you are attempting to, and I think succeeding in solving the two big problems, which is marketing and monetization. So like those tactics, the kind of strategy, and it's more important than ever of making sure that all your social content is great and all that type of stuff are the key. But ultimately the key is great talent who people want to listen to and who have great rapport with each other, because that chemistry comes through in every good show.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think that works as a nice segue into, I'm going to bring it back to your time at News Associates.
Yeah.
And like, from the moment that you walked through the door and the buzzer rang, you and our chief shorthand tutor, Angela, and James Parsons, the chemistry was just very much almost instantaneous. Like nothing had ever changed for the past 17, 18 years. So yeah, tell me about your time and beginnings of your time at News Associates and where that went, how that went.
Well, I said to you, I was a unique student in the fact that I was incredibly young. So I was 18. I'd moved to London from a small town in the northeast of England. I was sleeping on my cousin's couch every day. And I was surrounded by people who were a lot more mature than me, a lot older than me. I was absolutely somewhere between a class clown, and Angela's just said I was one of the funniest students we had. I mean, one of is an insult. I like to think I was the funniest. But yeah, I was so young, so naive. It actually matured me quite a bit, because I was like, I mean, we didn't always act like it on a Thursday night, but so many of the people around me were that bit more mature and older. Listen, it was intense. I mean, I did the 6-month fast track course, you know, and it was intense. I always remember, it used to be, I lived with a cousin and I lived with an auntie and uncle who were miles out. So it used to take me 90 minutes to get in for the last 3 months of the course. And I always remember sitting on the train and I would just sit and do shorthand in my head. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm sure anyone who's done it has done the same thing. You hear your words and you're like, what's the shorthand of that? And I really struggled with shorthand for the first 6 weeks, maybe longer actually, I'm not sure, but I did really struggle with it. And then I got it, and I ended up I never did the exam, but I could do 130 words a minute by the end of it, because it just clicked one day. It was great fun. I mean, I met to be honest, the one disappointment is I met some great friends here, but outside of the odd thing that you see on Facebook and stuff, I've not seen a lot of them for some time. But the course was fantastic. I mean, I've recommended it to so many people, and lots of people have since gone on to do it. I had a really interesting experience. I don't know if you met him actually. There was a kid who worked with us at a platform called Joseph Sam, who's I smile because he's a similar character to me, and I had a real soft spot for him in the business. He's just left the business actually, but he did his training here as well, and yeah, it was brilliant. It gave me an amazing grounding. I actually did I'm pretty proud of the 3 years I did as 3 proper years I did as what I would call a proper journalist rather than a magazine editor on the back of it as well. I learned a load of stuff, but also it was for me the first time where you have to be truly self-sufficient in your own educational journey. I was 18, I was living in London. I didn't do university, so I treat the Thursdays to Saturdays a little bit like university. But you had to kind of, I always remember, a lot of this keeps coming back to me dad, but he paid for me to do the course, he gave me money every month to live, and it was on the one condition to make sure you pass everything. So I passed everything, so that was good. Yeah, it was great. I mean, I covered my first football matches for the Sportsbeat team. Aldershot against Rochdale 3-2 was my first ever game I did in the Football League. So yeah, I loved it. It was a fantastic 6 months of my life. Yeah,
no, of course. Would you say it was almost like the making of your, well, I wouldn't necessarily say the making of you because it's a little bit of a cliche, but do you think the skills that you learned during those 6 months you took further into your career?
100%, because I would say it was I actually found it challenging, and I think I found it more challenging than others. I never found school challenging, and I did well in school, but I definitely should have done better. And that's something I look back on and regret, because I've never revised for an exam or anything like that in my life. I was that annoying kid who used to drive people mad. But this I had to knuckle down. I found this really challenging for the first 2 to 3 months. Every aspect of it, my grammar was not up to scratch. The news writing bit. I mean, the way that you could fail on that, you're talking simple mistakes in the first paragraph and stuff like that. So, and I found the shorthand really challenging. So, yeah, I think it was because it was probably, I'd kind of sailed through life in school and A-levels and things like that. And it was the first time, because of the intensity of it, that I really did it. But also, I always remember there was a guy called Craig Chisnell who used to run the newsroom. I think he now works at The Athletic, who I've still chat to the odd time on LinkedIn and stuff like that. He was great because he was brutal. Do you know what I mean? He was yeah. And at times I thought he derived pleasure from it, but since I've met him, in the afterlife of it, it's very clear that he was just doing that to give everybody the reality check and the exposure. So it was the first time I was properly understanding working life, responsibility. If you were doing shifts in the newsroom, that you had to be there on time and do a good job. And I did a few of we used to do the Football League paper and stuff like that on a Saturday. It was intense, man. That was you were thrown in at the deep end of that. And I always remember I was at the Press Association, that was the same. Saturdays from 5 o'clock onwards, you literally don't come up for air for 3.5 hours. So 100%, it was my first exposure to any of that type of stuff. It was the first time I had to really knuckle down and work that bit harder to achieve stuff. It created a work ethic in me, but also I was 18. I was traveling 90 minutes in and out every day. It was just completely new experience.
Where were you traveling from? Just sheer curiosity.
I lived in a place called Abbey Wood, which is near Charlton. It's miles out. So you used to get I used to do it. I used to get the train I've just got from Waterloo would be my end point. So I would get a train to London Bridge to Waterloo on the tube. Yeah. Then the Waterloo to Wimbledon train, and then we were in Wimbledon at the time.
I've got a mate that lives in Bexley Heath, and that exact same route. Every now and again, I'll stay over at his, and I make that journey, and I understand that
the thing is, they've got the Elizabeth line now.
The Lizzie line is
about 10 minutes. So yeah, that was it. It was a trek, and it was I didn't could have lived there, but it was quite a rough area and stuff like that. So I always remember and I used to do, part of that hour and a half was a 20-minute walk through from the train station to where they live, which was, when you're getting in at midnight after a night out, it was an interesting experience at times. So yeah, there was a lot of things like that toughened me up. So yeah.
I understand. I'm a Luton boy. That's where I'm from. So but enough said about that a bit. But yeah, tell me a little bit more about PA. So you obviously alluded to it about a couple of times as well. 3 years you spent there working as a sports journalist.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Well, I mean, PA is a big part of the whole. PA got me to news associate, so I always remember. You know, I think if I was I hate feeling like I'm trying to give life lessons to people, but if I was gonna say one thing about my life, it's take every opportunity that you've ever had, like, and really don't just kind of like really take it. So like, if you look at me, right, I always remember a conversation with my law professor at A level, which was, I think I dropped 4 marks out of 360 in three law exams, and I always remember them sitting me down and were like, look, this is I mean, you got to understand, like, Hartlepool is a town of 100,000, very working class. Most people work in industry. Like, even doing journalism was a step outside. But at the time, like, the law teacher was like, well, we want to try and send you to do law. And I always remember saying, well, I said, there's one big problem with that, which is I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to be in law for a career. And they were kind of gobsmacked by that. But they did say to me, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I always remember I'm a Man United fan, and that was the year they won the second Champions League. And I said, well, I think I want to be a sports journalist. I love sport. I always remember Rick wrote me personal statement for if I was going to go to uni, and it started with, like every disillusioned schoolboy, I wanted nothing more than to be a professional footballer when I was a kid. And then I kind of like went into how that is the evolution, and this is the thing I want to do next. So anyway, back in the day we had, I think it was teletext. So I looked at teletext and I saw something at the bottom that said, powered by the Press Association. So I just learned how to drive. So I contacted them and on a kind of email form online. They phoned me up and said, oh, do you want to come and do a week's work experience? I was like, great. So on the Easter holidays of, I think, the second year of college, I went and did work experience, and I loved it. You know, again, I was like 17. There was a guy who happened to be from Hartlepool there, so that helped me. But I was loud. I mean, everybody here knows I was loud. So kind of approached it with that. And listen, I don't think I was very good, but they kind of took a bit of a shine to me. Advised me to not go to university and do a journalism course. I looked into journalism courses, saw news associates. I actually applied and did my interview in Manchester. And they wanted me to go to Manchester, which theoretically would have been a better fit geographically, but I had family who lived in London, so it was an opportunity to come here for 6 months, stay with family and do that. So I did that. And then essentially I did the course and then emailed PA and said, right, you told me to do this, so you need to give me a job.
Yeah.
So they offered me 2 days as a trainee. The Hartlepool Mail gave me 2 days. I always remember I did 2 days at PA. I did 2 days at the Hartlepool Mail. Then the Hartlepool Mail phoned me and said, do you want to come and do a 6-month internship? And I was like, let me kind of think on it. And then literally 10 minutes later, PA phoned me and were like, do you want to come and do 2 weeks? Like, we've got another 2 weeks of shifts for you. And to be honest, like, PA was news report, and I definitely wanted to be into sport. PA was sport from the beginning. So I did 2 weeks at PA. After a day, they offered me 6 months, and then after 6 months, they reopened a traineeship scheme, and I did that. And then, I mean, that 3 years was class. Like, we were the national news agency for the Olympics, so I managed to worm my way into covering table tennis at the Olympics in 2012. So I saw a lot of like James Toney, Ben Baker. Does he still work here?
No.
So he worked here for a while, actually. He was on my course as well. Saw those guys there, did that, and then I ended up doing they used to run the ECB website. Yeah. So I ended up working for that, which was great. I got to cover the Ashes. Everyone who knew me here knows I'm a massive cricket fan. So yeah, I was doing a lot of really good stuff. But then a bit of a crossroads moment came, which is that my wife's mum was unwell, so we had to go back to Hartlepool, and because I was working on a website, I could work from home there, which was fine. But I'd really started to get into NFL, and when I did my news associates on the Friday, I did you do your Friday day. Mine was at the All Out Cricket magazine.
The placement.
Yeah, that was my placement. Yeah, so I pitched to that magazine company to start an NFL magazine. They agreed to do it. We had to get a certain number of subscribers in the first year to keep it going. So I did it alongside my job for the first 6 months. we had a great thing where we got the Super Bowl issue onto Sky and we sold an extra 5,000 copies and we kind of just went for it. So at that point, I started the NFL magazine. I did some freelance stuff, so I picked up some contracts at PA to cover Hartlepool, Middlesbrough, local football teams. Did a few Premier League games for Goal.com and things like that, and basically was planning a bit of freelance life. And then, to be honest, the magazine got to a point where it was doing well enough that it could be a full-time job. So yeah, I've done bits and bobs in journalism, but I wouldn't say it was a long journalism career. I really loved the NFL magazine stuff. Long form writing, completely different way of covering occasions. Like, you know, the Super Bowls I covered didn't have to write anything on the whistle. Could really think about it. Could get it. You go into the locker room after the game in the Super Bowl and you're writing colour pieces. So I love that. And I also wrote a book on the history of the NFL called Any Given Sunday, which is, of all the things I've done, the thing I'm still probably take the most pride in. It's also the thing that me 9-year-olds and 5-year-old doesn't know yet, but the 9-year-old's most excited about it. He thinks his dad's an author. So
yeah, no, of course he is an author. He is an author.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Okay, so then let's talk a little bit more gridiron, more NFL. Let's go into American football. How did you get into it, and why did you start the magazine?
Well, I got into it when I was a kid, but I actually got more into it at News Associates. So like I always remember myself, Dan McEwen and Pete Harmer, who were two of the guys on the course with me, none of whom I think are journalists. One's, I think, is now a professor of history somewhere. We watched the Indianapolis Colts, New Orleans Saints Super Bowl together. So I was always a fan. I was a fan through school. But basically, I started covering the games in London for PA. And then I started to like get in the scene of like knowing Neil Reynolds, who presented on Sky, Jeff Reinbold, kind of met them at a few events and stuff like that. They were starting to do, I always remember it, PA sent me to cover an event at Headingley, where Liam Plunkett and others were basically in the nets against Minnesota Vikings players. And it just got me into it. And then ultimately, like, I'd obviously had exposure to magazine world from knowing Tri-North, who were the company who did All Out Cricket. And listen, it was just grown enormously, and I felt, there'd been NFL magazines in the 80s and 90s, and then there were none. And the sport was growing. They were selling out Wembley every week. I mean, I'm trying to think, it was 2007 season that they started. So by then you kind of 6 years into that, and you're selling it out every week. So it just felt like there was a real opportunity in that. And there was, like, you know, we. At its height, we had 2,500 subscribers paying £40 a month, and it was great. They were doing more in Europe. That was the opportunity, and I was incredibly passionate about it. That was it, really.
Yeah. Any interviews that you did that you were like, oh my days, this?
I mean, doing the book was unreal. Like, because basically the book was the 100-year history of the NFL through 20 games. So, you know, the only people that I really wanted to interview one-on-one that I never was Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. I'm a Patriots fan. But, you know, I interviewed about 30 Hall of Famers. Jerry Rice, the best NFL wide receiver of all time, I interviewed on FaceTime. At the Super Bowl, I've interviewed any number. I mean, I'm trying to think of, like, so many. In the Hall of Fame in the NFL, you get a gold jacket. So the Super Bowl's amazing because basically they have this thing called Radio Row. In Radio Row, every major radio station descends in a conference room. Yeah. And essentially, that conference room. So I've interviewed Ryan Reynolds in there. Like, you know, it's a bit of everything. Ryan Reynolds, who, by the way, tried to buy Hartlepool United before he bought Wrexham, which is an eternal frustration of mine. But yeah, like, that room is just a who's who of NFL greats, Hollywood stars, musicians, actors. Jamie Foxx we've interviewed. Like, so yeah, like, there's been a lot. I tell you what, I've got a good answer.
Go on.
My favourite one, who I've interviewed, and I am not ashamed to say that I stood up in Radio Row. Radio Row's quite loose, right? American radio, it's bombastic, right? So you can get away, this isn't as unprofessional as it sounds. I did once stand up in Radio Row with this accent and shout, "Who loves orange soda?" and it was Kel from Keenan and Kel.
Oh, that's good.
So that would be. Listen, I've interviewed some class amazing people, but I used to love Keenan and Kel when I was a kid. So that was a lot of fun.
That's a valid answer, to say the least. So now I want to pivot into a game. So I'm going to call this one Build Your Own Brand. So build your own media brand. So I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios.
Yeah.
We're going to do 3 rounds, and you tell me how you would build that brand from the ground up. Okay. So let's say, for example, you have this one might be a little bit easy for you, but we'll start off easy. Let's say you've got a podcast show on, let's go for the bottom half of the Premier League teams. And I guess we are counting Tottenham in that as well, but
are you a Tottenham fan?
No, I'm Man United.
Oh, no, you're Tottenham.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess we're counting
They
Tottenham.
might be in the top half of the Championship next season.
Honestly. For a Gen Z audience, so specifically for Gen Z, and how would you go about doing exactly that? So giving a little bit of shine to the bottom half of the Premier League teams.
I mean, I only think about it through the lens of our own business. I mean, our whole thing, the thing I haven't mentioned in the business is we have this kind of amplification network on social. So we've done campaigns for the EFL where we've got like 10,000 social communities that are signed up to our network where we distribute content through them. So as a starter for 10, there is like, I know that every Premier League club has online communities. So you know, you need to be tapping into that. Kind of huge fan bases and everything like that. Listen, I think as much as it's not necessarily content, it might not be podcasts necessarily that I engage with, it is more those fan communities through YouTube, through social that are really killing it with the Gen Z audiences at the minute. Like, we have a good partnership with YouTube and was chatting to them a few months ago, and like the biggest thing they're seeing now is the second screen and stuff. So like the United Stand, the Goldbridge stuff, and also like what you're starting to see now is rights holders are actually giving that content to them. So I mean, the strategy for me, I don't know that you can do bottom half like specifically as a concept, but I think you can do all of the clubs individually within that. But a strategy for like, because that's an ever moving feast, like of the club who's 10th might be 15th one week and vice versa. Like, I think an interesting brand. So when we did Good Bad Football, right, we have the overlap and we have Stick to Football. They're very specific football shows, like they're very polished and they speak to a certain audience. When we started Good Bad Football, the ambition was basically, there's an amazing football podcast called Under the Cosh. Now, Under the Cosh is a little bit like the brand that I would build from what your brief is, which is that Under the Cosh is like real football. It's Football League, like, you know, it's like mental stories and it's great. But so our model with GBF was a lead Under the Cosh, right? So that was essentially focused on, you know, get people who've been at the very top level. Well, I wanted it to be northern. That's a big sensibility of mine. And I also don't think it's catered to enough in the space, given how much passion exists in that part of the world. But I wanted it to be northern real, but elite. So like Nicky and Paul are incredibly working class, down to earth. They speak to that football fan, but they're also 2 of the most successful English footballers of all time. So if you take the beats of that has been an enormous success. It's our biggest. But apply it at the same level to kind of the sack race, the Premier League. There is a show in that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a show in relegation. Like, you know what I mean? Those stories of great escapes or horrible relegations and where football goes wrong. I mean, like, you know, you mentioned Tottenham. Like, football clubs go wrong. Like, they're as incompetent as every other line of business. You only have to look, I'm a United fan as well. You only have to look at United over the last 15 years to see, even at that level, it can go badly wrong. And in some ways, that is more interesting than what's happening at the top. So I think you have to focus in on the relegations, the manager's getting sacked, the manager who lasts 20 days who comes in to rescue it and goes, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's basically, it's building storylines around that.
Yeah.
You know?
I guess as well, like, depending on who goes down this season, Forest, Spurs, or West Ham.
Yeah.
That's going to definitely be one of those relegations
100%.
where you're just like...
And you'd call it too good to go down.
Mm-hmm. Too good to go down,
that would be, so something like that, like, you know, that you could build upon. We might look at that, by the way. Yeah, too good to go down would be class, because that just immediately lends itself, you know, and then you get on Harry Redknapp, because Harry Redknapp hadn't got relegated ever. I think he did by the end once, but like he would always be a guy who came into a club when it looked like they were going to go down. I always remember Brian Robson was the first manager who kept a team up when they were bottom at Christmas, was West Brom. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're too good to go down.
Too good to go down. Oh, that's a really good one. Okay, this next one I'm going to see if I can make it a little bit more difficult. Let's go for, we'll keep it northern. Let's do northern bands of the noughties. Okay. Northern bands of the noughties. And yeah, actually, I'm going to open up just a little bit more. Just northern bands over the past of this century. Yeah. So you've got quite a few different options as well that you can go for about that. How would you make a podcast show on them? What would you make the niche? How would you make it interesting? I
don't know a huge amount about it, but like there is a whole like vibe around Manchester in the northwest that happened. You know, I would probably focus in on Stone Roses versus Oasis and do a kind of everything for me. Like, music sits at the intersection of culture with sport and everything else. You've got the Stone Roses and you've got Oasis. Man United, Man City. Mm-hmm. Like, I would do some kind of rivalries documentary podcast that tells the story of that place in time. Like, that basically became those are the community epicenters of Manchester. So you've got your two football teams, and as much as City weren't United at the time that those two were in the heyday, City were like a massive club battling around League One, League Two and everything else. And when you see what City have become, it's almost interesting to revisit that part of the history because it's kind of forgotten. One of my best mates has actually just written a book on, also a journalist on City. He's from City, born and bred. So yeah, I think that's what I would do with everything with me. I'll always link back to sport, but I think there's a whole kind of, you know, you look at the Oasis reunion, right? They captured a zeitgeist that was more than just a band, and that I think is because it's like in a way that the Beatles and Liverpool don't. So I always remember going to the Beatles museum. This is just a tangential story in Liverpool with Kurt Warner, Kirk Cousins, who were NFL quarterbacks and a famous NFL writer, and they showed us round, and I said, "Oh, how often do they come?" And they said, "Oh, they've never been." Yeah. So there's a whole museum in Liverpool dedicated to the Beatles, and not one of them had ever set foot in the place. Yeah. So I feel like the Beatles don't have that connection with the city in the way that Oasis and the Stone Roses did. There's a really interesting, like, kind of elevated documentary to be put together on that, I think, about the evolution of Manchester as a city that flows through that as well, because Manchester evolved enormously through that period and has become kind of the UK's second city, I guess you would say. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's something like that, but also great characters, great rivalry. Like, you know, I think they've said a lot of things about each other at different times and things like that. So that would probably be what I'd focus on.
Because I guess that's a really interesting point you make about Oasis back then. Like, City in the 90s / early 2000s were like just hustling around, just trying to get by. And Oasis made Manchester City almost a little bit punk rock. I don't know. Yeah. But now the Manchester City of today, they're not. I wouldn't necessarily call them punk rock. I mean, they're a fantastic team and they've won much.
It's definitely like they couldn't be further removed from that.
Yeah.
And obviously you've still got. I mean, I always remember Noel Gallagher doing. I was watching City Sport in Lisbon because Ruben Amorim was getting the United job, and Noel Gallagher was doing co-coms on TNT, which I think was a bit strange. But like, so they've still got the kind of association with the club, but like, the club is fundamentally different. So I think there's like, trying to think of the documentary. I once watched a documentary, and it was about the shift of San Francisco from one thing to another, and there was a sports team connected to. But anyway, there's a whole thing around the culture of a city, the rivalry between the bands, the football teams that the bands represent. I think there's something in that.
Yeah, no,
it would need a much better creative mind than me to tell you what the beats of the story are. But I think there's as a kind of blank canvas, there's a lot to paint on there.
Well, to be fair, I would listen. I would listen. So then, before we go on to the Fast and Furious round, if you had any advice that you could give yourself when you were 18 years old, just starting the course, what would you say to the 18-year-old Matthew?
I'll probably say the same thing I'm saying to anyone who's listening to this now, which is because it is take every opportunity. Like, to the nth degree. I mean, literally, I can trace my whole career journey through like 3 opportunities and how one evolved into the next. Do you know what I mean? Like, you start the magazine, that gets you introduced to that person, which like everything is kind of a domino effect in my life. So, but I did that naturally. Like, I always remember, this is a very strange thing, right? But it stuck with me. And I've forgotten the name of the lad. There was a lad on the course who came up to me at the end, and you obviously don't realise things about yourself and how you project yourself. And he barely spoke on the course. And he came up to me kind of on the last night and said, just want to say how much I've enjoyed meeting you. He said, I've never met anyone who can walk into any room and own it. He said, you'll go far in life. But I was like, that's the most... It was so profound, and at the time I just brushed it off. But it's one, you know, when something sticks in your head like that.
Yeah.
I always remember. So like I think it's know yourself and know what you're good at. Because I certainly didn't know what that was a thing that I was good at. And frankly, honestly, I've learned it accidentally because like honestly, without COVID, I think I'd still be doing the NFL magazine. And in the end, I'd be loving life. Me and my wife always talk about like. That was probably the best days of our life. First house, didn't really have any money, but we were both like enjoying what we were doing and stuff. And it was like our kid, before we had our little one, and when we did, he was only young. So I love that bit of my life, but I do think like the kind of next stages of the career that I've had show that it would have been a bit of a waste as well. So like, I think self-awareness and like what you're good at and homing on those strengths. Like a lot of people in life focus on their weaknesses, but like if you can really focus on your strengths and drive your decision making through your strengths, I think that's a good thing. So yeah, I think self-awareness, take every opportunity. Those would be my two.
Self-awareness, take every opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay, so now with that, I want to enter the fast and furious round. So it's been brilliant hearing your story, and you talk so candidly about it as well.
Yeah.
So now I've got some quick questions you can answer as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
Let's get it going. So, are you an extrovert or are you an introvert?
I'm an extrovert.
I could probably have guessed that. Okay. So, dream interview if you haven't interviewed them already.
Eric Cantona.
Eric Cantona. Have you interviewed them?
No, but if he ever comes on Good Bad Football, I will be at the studio before it starts.
Yeah.
Or Alex Ferguson, but Cantona would be the one. I mean,
Yeah.
Cantona is my absolute idol. Yeah.
There's something about like the way that he carries himself that I just respect. He's the king.
He's everything to me. He's the reason I love sport. And the reason I love sport is so much of a driver to everything that's happened in my life professionally.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Night owl or early riser?
Definitely a bit of both. As I've got older, I love a night out, but as I've got older, I'm a early riser as well.
Yeah,
but I would say night out.
Okay, we'll go with that. Yeah. So then, favorite concert you've ever been to?
I have seen Bruce Springsteen in concert 8 times, but I once saw him at Circus Maximus in Rome, which was just like, I mean, it's just farcical. It's like seeing Pavarotti in the Colosseum, like, albeit without the kind of like national connection to the venue. I mean, it was just spectacular.
Oh, that's a really cool one.
Yeah.
So then, let's say, for example, after the recording of this episode, you were going to interview Eric Cantona. Is there a musician or what music would you listen to get yourself in the mindset for Eric Cantona? And that's, you've done all your prep, you already know everything about him.
Well, my favourite musician is Bruce Springsteen. He'd also be on the list of that. But the answer is I'm a massive, I love swing music. I would listen to Frank Sinatra. That feels more like chilled Eric Cantona in vibe to me than particularly Springsteen at the moment, as he kind of launches into his next brilliant tirade against Trump and everything, which I'm supportive of. But yeah, like it will be Frank Sinatra, something a bit more chilled.
I think I need to see that happen. Like you interviewing Eric Cantona, and then in the background somebody's playing My Way. That just.
You know what? Right? So like, I've got a granddad who passed away a couple of years ago when he was 98. Who I was incredibly close to. My dad used to work on the oil rigs when I was a kid, so my granddad basically was like a second dad to me. And he used to. I always remember just before about 5 years before he passed away, I took him to see the Rat Pack show, and it was such a like great experience. But I was in New York recently, and this is the night owl thing. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was having a slice of pizza in a proper old school Italian pizza by Slice joint in New York, and they were just playing Frank Sinatra, and I was just sat there thinking about my granddad, and I was like, that's living, isn't it? So
Most definitely. That's something that I need to put on my bucket list. 3 a.m. in New York, get me that pizza slice. Okay, so then last question is one word to describe your career as of right now.
Roller coaster.
Roller coaster. And with that, thank you very much, Matthew Sherry, for
Really
coming onto the
appreciate
podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation. And there are so many takeaways for people to... And I think as well, like, the way that you spoke so naturally and so confidently as well, it seriously shows... I completely understand why you've got to the place where you have today. So with that, I've been Plamdi Mabungu, and this has been How to Be a Journalist.